Hi everyone, this is Karen from the Peace Discipline channel where you can learn all about nonviolent discipline. Today's video is part of a series on what not to do in discipline, and we're going to be looking at threats. Children need to know that if they're doing a wrong thing, you do know how to stop them, and if there's a right thing that they really do need to do, you know how to get them to do it. That's a sense of containment, and it's something important for children to have. The question for many parents, though, is how do we get children to stop what they're doing if they're doing a wrong thing? And how do we get them to do a right thing? Because many of us grew up with a punitive background. In other words, we grew up with hitting and shouting and threatening. So when we want to be containing, we tend to think we have to threaten children, get them to do what we want them to do. Now, in another video, I looked at the difference between being containing and being coercive. If you're using threats, you are being coercive, trying to force a certain reaction from the child using fear. If you don't do X, I will do Y. When you're being coercive, your aim with that is to be scary enough that the child will feel forced into doing what you want them to do. Now, actually, this doesn't work well. When we're coercive with children, we model threatening behavior, and they can learn that and use it right back on us and on other people. That's not a good scenario. Studies have shown that children that come from homes where people are coercive are more likely to have conduct disorders, in other words, really bad behavior. So threatening is not helping your child be more cooperative and respectful. If anything, it's undermining what you're trying to do in your discipline and is more likely to have negative results. The other problem with threatening, of course, is that it makes children feel unsafe. How can you feel safe in an environment where people threaten you? So threatening is coercive, it sets a bad example, and it makes children feel less safe. So this is another useless tool that I'm going to suggest we should throw out of the discipline toolkit. Now, a question I'm very much concerned with here on the Peace Discipline channel is what do we put in the toolkit instead? Because when our toolkit is empty, because we've taken out the things we grew up with, like hitting and shouting and threatening, we run the risk of doing what I spoke about in a previous video, which is hammering away with tools which don't work or don't fit the situation. As Abraham Maslow said, when the only tool one has is a hammer, one tends to treat everything as if it's a nail. And actually what we need to be doing in the discipline process is using attunement. Now, attunement is very different to hammering away. What attunement means is that your responses fit appropriately with the child's needs and their signals. Their signals may be bad behavior. What do you do in response to that? So we need a range of tools that we can use in different situations because different situations call for different tools. So what are some of the tools that we can use instead of threatening? First of all, I'd like to suggest that we work with the children's motivation rather than their fear. So when you want your child to do something, think of having a reward system or offering a once-off reward so that they can be motivated to do something rather than doing it because they're scared of you. You might say something like, if you cooperate nicely now in the shop, when we get in the car, I'm going to tell you a funny story. And you'll find that children will be more motivated to move along with you and cooperate because now they have something to look forward to. Or you might say to your class, if you're a teacher, guys, if we get all of this work done, then we can do chill time in the last 5 minutes of a lesson, which is where you can play your own music and we can relax and chat a little. Suddenly the class has a reason to get their work done promptly because they have something to look forward to. Here's another suggestion, and I've made the suggestion in previous videos, but it's just such a brilliant tool. Use a when-then statement. So instead of saying, if you don't pick up your toys, you're not going to watch TV, you would say, when you've picked up your toys, then we can watch TV. Your child might ask you, can I go out now? And you would say, when you've tidied your room, then you can go to your friend. Or when you've put that away, you can go outside. You can see there it's not coercive. You're working with the child's motivation. You don't have to use an angry voice. The child, it sounds like you're on their side and you also want them to go outside or do the thing they want to do. You're reminding them about what they need to get done first. There's a condition. And that helps the child exercise some self-discipline and do something that they need to get done. Here's another suggestion. Don't threaten, act. And what I mean by this, does not act in a punitive and scary way. Let me give the example of threatening a timeout. Some people say we shouldn't use timeouts, but in fact, there's no problem with using a timeout. It's the way people use timeouts that can be problematic. Some people use timeout in a punitive and threatening and coercive way, and then it will be problematic. But if you use it in a calm and respectful way, it can be a very useful tool. And I'll be making more videos on this later on, sharing more of what the research really says about timeout. I want us to consider one aspect now, and that is that many people threaten a timeout rather than giving one. So what they'll say is, you're going to get a timeout. You're going to get a timeout. Is that what you want? They'll say that over and over at different points as a child's behavior goes out of control. Now, I always think the child might be thinking at this point, so my behavior is still at an acceptable level because nothing's happened yet. You may totally be sending the wrong message. The reason you are threatening a timeout is because you think their behavior is unacceptable. But the threat is not the active ingredient here. The timeout's the active ingredient. So for the child, they're actually reading that their behavior hasn't reached your threshold yet because you're threatening, but you haven't done anything about it. And that's why I say don't threaten, act. If the behavior is unacceptable enough, rather step in and stop the behavior than threaten and try to coerce the child into stopping. So what does the research say about threatening a timeout? I found this very interesting. Timeout is mostly used either for defiance or for aggression. And what they found in the case of aggression, that's like if your child is hitting or hurting somebody, what they found in the case of aggression is that even one warning, like you're going to get a timeout, actually increases the aggression. And so it's better just to step in and say timeout. It's also better for the other kid that's getting hurt because now they don't have to wait till you give the timeout, getting more hurt along the way. You've actually stopped the behavior as soon as you saw it happening. So in the case of aggression, I wouldn't threaten a timeout. I'd just step in and give a timeout. So you see somebody hit somebody else, you go, timeout right now. And you would remove them from each other for a little while. Afterwards, when people have cooled down, you can guide them into saying sorry. You can listen to what they want to tell you about the situation. What research has clearly shown is that using timeouts consistently and calmly does help and reduces aggressive behavior. So remember that threatening the timeout tends to increase the aggression. Using a timeout appropriately can reduce aggression. The other thing a timeout is often used for is non-compliance. Now here, they say that no warning or one warning tend to work best. But more than one warning is not helpful. So where I would sometimes use a warning of a timeout is where nobody's getting hurt, but the child is maybe doing something that you really want them to stop. And you want to give them that little bit of chance to exercise self-control. That's why I would use it. So I'm not using it to threaten the child into stopping. I'm using it as an opportunity for self-control. And here's where I'm going to make another suggestion. Use a deadline. So if it's an aggressive situation, I would say don't threaten, act. If it's a defiant situation where the child knows they're not supposed to be doing something and they are doing that thing, I'm going to use the example of jumping on the bed. You've asked the child many times not to jump on their bed. Now you walk into their room and you see them jumping on the bed. So the suggestion I'm going to give here is don't threaten, give a deadline. When they're into an activity, expecting them to stop immediately may be a little unrealistic. You can try, you can say off the bed now and see what happens. Some children will jump off the bed. But if you know that your child won't stop, you might say off the bed, the timer count to 3, 1, 2, 3. They will most probably get off the bed by the time you count to 3, especially if they know that at this point you usually give a timeout. In this case, it would be a timeout from the thing they're not managing. So you would take them out the room and you would possibly close or lock the door so they can't go in and jump on the bed. So you're giving a timeout from the thing they're not managing, which is being in that room and refraining from jumping on the bed. They're not managing that, so you're going to block access to that room for a while. That's a timeout from being in that room. You might say, you stop by yourself, or do I need to stop you? I'm counting to 3. 1, 2, 3. You'll find that many children do stop by 3. If they don't, you just step closer, take them off the bed, take them out the room, close the door, and they have a timeout from being in that room. So you've acted, but not as quickly as if they were being aggressive. You've given a deadline within which the child can exercise some self-control. I like this option because since no one's getting hurt, there's not much to lose. And I want to give my child as much opportunity to exercise those self-control muscles as possible. You can also use this in the classroom. You might find children running around in your classroom and they're not supposed to. I can remember saying to some young children, can you stop by yourselves, or do I need to help you? Counting to 3. 1, 2, 3. At 3, they were still running, so I stepped in and I guided them to stop by taking their arms gently, getting them to sit down, and guided them into a quieter activity. They didn't manage that time. Other times, sometimes they manage. And that's really great. I feel I want to say something more about this example of giving a deadline before using a timeout, because I find in my workshops that many people struggle to see the difference between that and a threat. And I think it depends a lot on how you do it. So if you're saying, I'm counting to 3, and if you do not stop, you are getting a timeout, then you're using it in a more threatening way. But if you say, can you stop by yourself? Or do you need a timeout? I'm counting to 3. You're actually using your counting as an assessment, not a threat. There's a big difference. In the former, when you're using a threat, you're invested in the child choosing your choice. And you're trying to force them with that choice to choose to stop by themselves. That's still being coercive. How I like to use it is more as an assessment. So I know that the child could choose to stop or not. And I'm not too worried about that. I'm not worried about whether they don't choose to stop, because I know what I'm going to do if they don't choose to stop. I don't need to make them stop with that counting or with that warning. I just need to let them know what's going to happen, because I want them to exercise self-control. I'm using that counting as an assessment. When I count to 3, I'm trying to see, can they manage? Can they stop? If they can, great, they exercise self-control. If they didn't, well, it's to be expected. A lot of the time they won't manage to stop. I'm going to step in, I'm going to take them out the room and close the door. The difference is what you're trying to control. When you're using a threat, you're trying to control the child's behavior, and that's a problem because the child's behavior is not in your control. When you are being containing, and you are using your counting as an assessment, and then you are stepping in and doing what you need to do, you're controlling your behavior, which is in your control, and that's fine. So if you're counting or using a timeout, don't use it as a threat. Use it if you need it. So giving a deadline can be really useful. It doesn't have to be a deadline combined with a timeout or combined with you stepping in. Can be a deadline combined with a reward. And that was something we spoke about earlier, where I suggested working with the child's motivation instead of working with their fear. Instead of saying, if you make me late again, you are going to be sorry. If you get to the table by the time I count to 10, we can have a candle at the table and you can light it. That's a lovely reward. The child will come running to the table. In the class, you might say, if you're all quiet by the time I count to 5, then I'm going to tell you a joke, or then I'm going to tell you a little story of something that happened this morning. You'll find that a class will keep quiet because they love it when teachers tell them stories and jokes. It's not a lot of extra energy on your behalf, and it has a great result. Certainly much better than shouting, if you don't keep quiet, you are all going to be in detention. Much less stress for the teacher, and certainly more pleasant for the class. In all of this, what you're doing is, rather than threatening or coercing your child, setting up the environment so that it puts the child in the best position to behave well. If you think of rewards, what puts you in the best position? Do the thing that leads to the reward. If you think of the when-then statement, the thing you want to do is dependent on the thing your parent or your teacher wants you to do, and therefore you want to do it, because then you get to do what you want to do. If your parent may give you a timeout if you don't manage by the time they count to 3, It puts you in the best position to manage by the time they count to 3, because then your freedom is not limited by having that privilege taken away for a while. I've covered motivating your child with rewards, using a when-then statement, acting instead of threatening, just stepping in and doing what needs to be done, or giving a deadline so you give them a chance to develop self-control. Here's another suggestion. There may be times where you realize you can't stop the child doing a wrong thing, and that's okay. You're not in control of the child's behavior, but you are in control of yours and what you decide to do. So if the child doesn't stop what you're asking them to stop doing and does the wrong thing, you can always act in a containing way after that by asking them to make amends, guiding them to engage in restorative action, to put right the thing that they have done wrong. When you guide them to stop and they don't stop, you still have something to fall back on, restorative action, which means that they didn't just get away with the wrong thing that they did, because now they have to put right. They incurred some work for themselves, and perhaps they'll think more carefully about doing that in future. Also, when they engage in restorative action, perhaps they have to do something nice for another child that they had wronged. When they do that, it helps them realize and take in that what they did wasn't nice for the other person. But instead of just feeling guilty, they can do something about it and put right, which always feels better than feeling like a bad person. So to summarize, we've been through 5 alternatives to threat. There are many other alternatives. You can have a look on the Peace Discipline website where there's a toolkit, and you can also have a look at the research under the research tab if you're interested in that. To recap those alternatives, instead of threatening, motivate. Try a reward system, or perhaps a when-then statement. Thirdly, instead of threatening, act. If somebody's getting hurt, step in, give a timeout. Another suggestion, sometimes in the case of defiance, you don't have to stop the action right away and you want to give the child a chance to exercise self-control. In that case, give a deadline. Count to 3 or count to 5, where the child is clear that after that you will step in, you will perhaps give a timeout, or you will do what else needs to be done, such as switch off the TV or whatever the thing is that they're refusing to do. Lastly, sometimes you won't be able to stop the child, and that's fine. Perhaps then you could use restorative action and ask the child to make amends for the thing that they've done. If you're worried that the child will try to get away with not making amends, remember you can always fall back on your when-then statement. So later on, when they ask you if they can do something that they want to do, you might say, wait, we have unfinished business. When you've made amends, then you can do that. So the when-then statement is a very containing skill to fall back on. Threatening is a tool I'd love to see taken out of the toolkit, not only between adults and children, but in the world as a whole. There's a lot of things we can use instead. Something to think about. If you watch a TV series, perhaps a police series about politics or law, or even just a drama series, you will very often see a moment in which someone threatens somebody else and gets their way. And what concerns me about this is that action is often glorified. In other words, the person who was threatening is portrayed as the hero, and it's portrayed as an effective action where the other person backs down and the intimidation works. I think we need to question that, because what we're actually seeing, for instance, in research about relationships or in research on discipline, is that coercive and threatening behavior tends to escalate situations and increase aggression rather than succeed. I hope that this video helps us to become more aware of this behavior, which is so ingrained in our society, of threatening and using coercion. There are many alternatives to threat. In answer to the question of do they work as well, I would say no, they work better. That's all for now. I'll be back soon with more in our series of what not to do and more suggestions of what we can do instead. If you'd like to know more about these tools, you can always check out the Peace Discipline website at peacediscipline.com. If you'd like me to send you video links directly when I post a new video, I can send them to your email. Just send me an email at karen@peacediscipline.com. I'll add you to the Peace Discipline mailing list. So that's all for now. Thanks very much for watching.